Hello and good evening. I'm Graham. Welcome to Litquake, San Francisco's Literary Festival. We are streaming live from the Bay Area tonight, and our festival runs from October 8th to the 24th. You can find all the details for the festival at litquake.org. Tonight, we are honored to present Good Things in Small Packages, Writing Short Stories, curated by Rachel Khong. Tonight's event is co-presented by the Ruby and Left Margin Lit, with support from the Zellerbach Family Foundation, which has made Litquake Out Loud possible. This is a new curatorial series aimed at highlighting the Bay Area's BIPOC and queer writers and thought leaders. There's two more Litquake Out Loud events next week on Monday and Tuesday night, and you can watch the past events on our YouTube and Facebook pages. A few quick orders of business before we get started. There's a little Q&A function down there at the bottom of the screen. And when the spirit moves you, ask a question. We're going to save a little bit of time at the end to take audience questions and pass them around the panel. And at the very end of the night, when we shut down the Zoom, you're going to get a little pop-up. We're sorry about that, but it's a survey. And it's one that would be very, very helpful to us if you filled it out. It will take about 5 minutes. It's essential information about who you are and how our programming is impacting you. And it's very important information for our use for approaching new donors and for applying to grants. So please help us out and fill out the survey when it pops up at the end. You can further support the writers tonight by visiting your favorite independent online bookstore, or find our Litquake bookshelf at bookshop.org. We have all the writers tonight. All of their books are up on our page at bookshop.org. We also ask for your support of the Litquake organization to allow us to bring you these events largely for free. The Bay Area was already a precarious place for artists and arts nonprofits, and now things are even more difficult. If you believe in keeping literature a key component of the Bay Area's cultural landscape, please consider dropping us a few dollars. Every little bit counts. We accept donations on Venmo at Litquake, on PayPal at info@litquake.org, or directly at litquake.org. Now, let's get on with the show. Tonight's Litquake Out Loud panel on short stories has been curated by Rachel Khong, whose first novel, Goodbye Vitamin, won the 2017 California Book Award for First Fiction and was a Los Angeles Times Book Prize finalist for First Fiction. From 2011 to 2016, she was the managing editor, then executive editor of Lucky Peach magazine, where she also edited a cookbook about eggs called All About Eggs. In 2018, she founded the Ruby, a work and event space for women and non-binary writers and artists in the Mission District. Let's welcome up Rachel.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you all for being here for this event about short stories. I'm so honored and excited to be here and to be talking with a few brilliant friends and writers about short stories, both reading them and writing them. So I'm just gonna introduce everyone really briefly, but I encourage you to seek out their websites and social media to learn more about them, because they're just way more accolades than I can really squeeze in right now. But as I read their bios, they'll sort of pop onto the screen. So yeah, we'll get started. C Pam Zhang is the author of the debut novel, How Much of These Hills is Gold, just released this past April. Shruti Swamy is the author of this story collection, A House is a Body, which was just released in August. Mimi Locke is the author of the story collection, Last of Her Name, published in October 2019 by Kaya Press. And Yalitza Ferreras recently won the prestigious Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award, and you can find her stories in publications including Best American Short Stories, Kenyon Review, and the Southern Review. Yay, thank you all for being here. I wanted to focus on short stories tonight because I've read brilliant stories by you all, and I think especially right now, stories have brought me a lot of life and hope, and I love the way that a story can be both like a reprieve from the world, but also kind of better articulate the world. And yeah, just I think bring this like injection of another writer's voice and interests into your life in this like very short period of time. So at the end of this event, I'll be sharing this Google document with some story recommendations and some stories of our own from all the panelists. So please stick around for that. I actually don't know how to do that. Maybe I'll put it in the Q&A. I should have asked Graham. And if you have any questions you'd like me to ask, just feel free to put them in the Q&A box as well. But we'll just get started by, I just want to get started by asking, can you talk about your first encounter with short stories and when did you begin to love them?
I'll start. I think my first encounter was probably like 5th or 6th grade or something, and it was probably Edgar Allan Poe, which like now looking back is probably like, I don't know how smart that is. I don't know, the stories are pretty scary because like I remember reading like The Telltale Heart, and for the rest of my life I remember The Filmy Eye, which is like really gross, but also it just kind of tells you something about the form and about just the importance of picking very memorable details because you have less space to work with. And then I think the first short story that I read that really got me excited about short stories was probably Girl by Jamaica Kincaid, because it was like the first story I read that really spoke to me, and it was like really close to home, and it just that was probably like what started me. It made me feel like, oh, I can, I want to read more stories like this.
I too really, really love Girl, but that's not my answer to the question. I just have to talk about how much I love it. It's a short story I teach in every class that I teach about short stories because it's just like masterful and perfect. I would say that when I was growing up, I was like a novel snob, and I was sort of like, what's the point of short stories? Because I had this very like quantity over quality mindset, which was absolutely incorrect. So my first encounter with a short story that really moved me wasn't until after college when I read Amy Hempel's In the Cemetery Where Al Jolson is Buried. And it just destroyed me. I don't want to give too much away, but it's this short story that is told in these like very fragmented bursts. And it has this quality of almost like, I guess, like dancing a little bit around the center of what it is really about. And there was something really beautiful in that. And I think that, well, I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, but at the end of the day, I think that's what short stories do for me that novels really cannot. It's just like they're in this form that is brief enough that you're allowed to keep some distance from the mystery, which is like really beautiful in its own way.
I can go. I've been thinking about this question a lot because I don't think of myself, like I'm very suspicious of my taste as a teenager and as a young writer. I'm really a different writer and reader than I am now. And I'm not interested in stories the way I was then, like what I was interested in when I was interested in them. But I really remember reading Sherman Alexi's book, which is kind of like a novel in stories or a linked collection of stories. And just the vibrancy and the energy of the language, and maybe the way those stories, not a particular story, but the way that those stories touched each other but didn't make a whole like linear narrative novel arc was really thrilling, and something I still really love about story collections that are linked, that you can get these angles into a community or a person that you really can't with a novel. These like fragments build a different kind of whole than you would have, even if whether or not the story collection is linked, those fragments can make a different kind of whole than if you were telling like a linear or just even like a single story.
I really hard time thinking about this question because I actually was struggling to remember some of the early short stories that I read, and I realized that, oh yeah, I too was really into novels when I was growing up. Not because I was a snob like Pam, but because guilty. But I think
think they kind of just like seeped, you know, in terms of literary short story, they just kind of like seeped under my skin. I didn't really realize they were doing their crafty magic on me. But I think just as Shruti was talking, I was thinking probably my first encounter with the short story form was fairy tale, and that being quite, I don't think particularly constant at the time, but being now thinking back on it, thinking how impressive it was that you know, as a child, hearing or reading these stories, you can just be completely sucked into this world and it's all of its characters, and then it's such a generative experience as well. You end up kind of continuing the story, doesn't it? In your head. I think even now, it's kind of some of the short stories that really strike me have that kind of fable-like quality, whether it's really pronounced or very, very subtle. And I was thinking about one of the stories that just blew me away was a short palm of the hand story, very like a flash fiction, I guess you'd call it, by Kawabata, called The Goldfish on the Roof. And it's so dreamy. It's almost like a fever dream, but you know exactly what's going on until you don't. And it's really, really short and kind of nightmarish, and there's betrayal, and there's kind of bad parents and goldfish, and it's all incredible. And I've read it maybe a million times. I still don't understand it, but I love it.
Mimi, we're actually getting some comments from people watching that they can't hear you very well.
Okay.
I wonder if you could just move closer, or
I'm gonna project more. Is that better?
I think it's better.
Thanks for the feedback.
Yes, lots of feedback. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I think I was curious in the answers to this question because I don't really remember reading stories in school too much. You know, the assignments that we were given were always like novels, epic poems, whatever. But actually the way that I first encountered short stories, I think, was our family would always go on these like weekly Costco trips. And I always kind of just lingered by the books because that was the only thing of interest to me. And at one of those Costco trips, I found the Best American Short Stories. And this one was, I think, 2001, edited by Barbara Kingsolver. I can still remember like the yellow cover, and reading that, I begged my parents to buy it for me essentially, and then they did. And then I read it, and it was so exciting because I had never seen, I think, this range of voices in literature, and they were so great, also like juxtaposed against one another. There was like Ha Jin, but also Alice Munro and Jess Rowe. It was a real smattering of voices and influences. So yeah, that was my first encounter. And I wondered if folks also encountered stories outside of that sort of academic setting. And a lot of you actually answered my next question, which is just, do you remember the first short story that really stood out to you, really struck you? I don't know if we've heard from, well, actually, we might have heard from everybody about this, but anything else that just blew you away in either form or content or style?
Yeah, this was not like the first stories that I read, but I remember, and I also have to say that I feel like I'm sort of a late bloomer as a reader. Like I think that my reading changed a lot and became deeper and slower and more patient. I have like a really bad habit of reading super fast, and over the years I've tried to get myself to slow down more, and stories are really a wonderful teacher for that because they need to be read so slowly. So I read Mary Robeson I think her book is called Days. And I was just like, what is this? I can't believe there's super short stories and she just gets in and out. And it's something about just how brief they are and only something a little bit has happened. Like they're very, very subtle stories, I felt when I read them. And I was just like stunned. I like couldn't believe that it's funny. I wonder if you guys, this is a tangent because probably this isn't interesting. I don't really reread very often. And in fact, I have not read this book since I read it, maybe when I was maybe like 10 years ago. But anyways, it made a big impression on me. I wonder if it'd be different if I went back to it. It was just that it's really startling what you can do with a story in that frame, in a super tight frame.
Yeah, when Mimi was speaking about fables and fairy tales being some of her first introductions to stories, I was just like, oh yeah, of course. So I will give a sort of shout out to Angela Carter, who does these like witchy, fabulous, just like decadent language-wise fairy tale kind of not retellings, but sort of reimaginings, often with a feminist slant. And I think that, yeah, it's just like there's such an intensity to her short stories that I think is another sort of hallmark of short stories for me. It's like, it's really hard to sustain that in a novel and often not even pleasant for the reader or the writer to sustain that in a novel, but you can just sort of like go for it 110% in a short story.
Yeah, let's just segue into what makes a good short story. I think that intensity is definitely part of it. I really like that. Like, I think perfection is kind of attainable in a short story in a way that is really not in a novel. Like novels just have to be flawed like humans are. But with a short story, I mean, something like In the Cemetery Where Aljostin is Buried, I think is a perfect story. You can't improve it, you know? And there are so many stories like that in my mind. So I think, yeah, the way that they can, that stories can sort of capture a whole world in a small amount of space. Someone once told me, actually, I don't remember who said this to me, but that short stories were movies and novels are TV shows. And that makes a lot of sense when you think about like Brokeback Mountain was a short story and Arrival was a short story. And I that sort of aspect of like, you can just tell an entire story with a whole world and these real characters in it, and they can start somewhere and wind up somewhere entirely else, and that's it, and it's perfect.
Yeah, I actually think that I don't think stories can be perfect, or at least I don't think that's what one should strive for. I think that, I mean, anyone who's attended or been part of like a workshop, I think there's like, you know, feedback by committee or is one of the worst possible things you can do to a story. And I think that, you know, every story can be, I don't know whether it's improved upon, but there can be additions and nips and tucks, but then it becomes a slightly different story. And I feel like, I think sometimes when we think of the novels as a bit kind of flawed or shaggy, my problem with novels is that they kind of like start off great and then they get a little bit unfocused in the middle, and then the end is a little bit like a, you know, like air going out of a balloon slowly. And but with short stories, I think there's at least, I mean, I guess I'm just speaking for myself. I feel like I have more forgiveness towards a more forgiving attitude towards approaching a story, because anything can happen and any rules can be broken, and you don't even need to have a beginning, middle, or end. Whereas with a novel, I want whatever the setup has been, the opening, to kind of fulfill its promise in a way. And with a short story, I'm not as as picky about that. And but I think, you know, to what you've all said, I think intensity also just really in the sense of immersion that can be sustained, even if it's like a more of a dreamy quality, or maybe more of a quotidian quality, and the sort of like the beauty in the mundane is something that can, I think, be more easily sustained in a short story. And I think it's a real pleasure to to encounter that as a reader and to try and create that as a writer.
Yeah, I think to sort of piggyback on that, with a short story, I do think some can be perfect, but I just—
I'll meet you outside.
Okay. We'll fight this out. It's more like the exciting thing for me about reading short stories is I want to see what the author can do in just a few pages, because I feel like they're going to try more things, even if it's not, you know, straight up like experimental story. But it's just that, like, yeah, when you enter a novel, it's kind of like a contract with the author. Like, there's certain expectations that I feel like the reader has, and with a short story, it's a little bit looser. Not that, and I'm not talking about like quality. There's still, you know, you still want all the good things like language and you know, all the things. But it just feels like it can be you have like sort of like less expectation, but as I said, not on quality, but just sort of like, where are you going to go? So it's always yeah, so that's always like a really fun thing about reading stories individually. And then I find that then when I read collections, I love to see what the author is doing in different stories, even if they're, you know, writing about similar themes. But it's sort of like yeah, just seeing like with a collection, it's kind of like, and I'm probably jumping ahead here, but sort of like seeing like the facets of a jewel, you know, with a story collection, and just seeing like the different sides of like how the author is treating like their theme, I guess.
Yeah, I also think that there's like a lot of room, weirdly, there's like a lot of room in a short story where there isn't in a novel, like for the reader to step in. Like there can be a little bit more space and like not emptiness, but open space or silence in a story. There's so much pressure of the unspoken that's on a story that doesn't play as strongly, I think, in a novel. But the reader, I think that it can be an even more intimate form, or like a more participatory form in a certain way when you're a reader of a short story, because of that frame and the fleetingness of the moment that it's capturing and the space within the story, you're stepping into it a little bit more. I feel like with a novel, and especially like having been spending time working on my novel for a while, there's like so much stuff, you know, I'm like wandering around in this person's mind, and there's like, that's another kind of space, like I'm in the space of that character's consciousness, but there's less space in that for the reader somehow. So I think there's something really beautiful about that, the tightness of that form and the spaciousness that it can allow. And Mimi, I'll just add that I think it's ironic that you don't think that stories can be perfect, because I actually think that some of your stories are truly perfect. Like in particular, I think that some of your stories are perfect. So, and I'm not just saying that, I mean it.
You're just being difficult.
He just has a higher bar than the rest of us.
So I like that. I like having more of an open mind and just thinking, you know, in another writer's hands, or, you know, if the writer had kept working on this, or the writer had been in a different state of mind, it still might have been a really effective story, but maybe just a slightly different story. Yeah. I want to bring up point of view in the short story, how I just remember the story by Rachel, I think it's Rachel Kaddish, called Love Story, and I think it came out in the late 90s, and it's basically, it's about this long, it's really short, and it just gallops, you know, it's very, very brisk, and it spans a lot of time. It's basically like these disgruntled adult children who don't approve of their widower father's new wife, who's younger and not the brightest, you know, bulb in the light box, and it just whizzes through, and then it does this sudden kind of, you know, the scope suddenly just goes from here, like just like this, and then it ends on this one character, one of the adult children, and the one motion that he does, and it's just absolutely incredible. We should add that to this. I think I should have put that in the syllabus, the one pager. But I think that's, if you did that in a novel, it could work as well, but it would just be a slower burn. And I think that there's something about the compactness of the form that makes a move like that really, really exciting.
Yeah, I kind of want to approach my answer to this from the perspective of writing short stories as opposed to maybe reading short stories. Because I think I do agree that there are perfect short stories. But also what you were saying, Yalitza, about, what were you saying? About oh my God, you said something brilliant. I can't remember what it was. Anyways, but I do think about like sort of experimentation, I think. And I do think part of that is honestly like from the writer's perspective, when you're only committing to 1 to 20 pages, you can actually experiment with so many more, right? It's from the writer's perspective, like something that you may not be able to sustain for 250 pages, or that you think may, I'm just gonna speak pragmatically, may not be sort of like sellable for 250 pages. You can try anything you want in the short story format. And I think there's like that interplay between what the writer is thinking when they're sitting down to craft a short story that we see, and the sort of like experimentation and intensity and just like playing weirdness and space allowed in the short story form. Because if you do something really weird and it doesn't work, you've only lost, I don't know, like a month or 2 of your life, not 5 to 10 years.
You don't know how long it takes me to write a short story, Pam.
I know.
It only took 10 years to put the collection together.
Okay,
but
well,
I mean, if you can write it in a month, then maybe I should pay you.
100 years, I guess.
Yeah, I would love to talk more about just writing short stories and how you feel the approach is different from writing something longer, because I totally co-sign everything Pam just said about being more willing to like experiment in that short space. Like I think I felt very daunted when I was writing my first novel, wanted to keep it, more grounded in real life. But I feel like in my short fiction, I'm a lot more willing to let things get really wild and crazy, and to have fantastic things happen and kind of science fiction-y things. Because yeah, like Pam said, it's maybe a month of your life, or maybe a year if you're Mimi, and it just it's okay. You can just jump and see if you fall or whatever, but usually it actually does work out. It does pay off to be bold with your writing. So I think I'm trying to take a just apply what I've learned in story writing to the next thing that I'm working on, to be willing to take greater risks, and just not be so freaked out about whether or not a thing is allowed to work or not work, and just seeing where that goes.
I now remember what Yalitza said that I thought was really brilliant. She said something about the contract that you enter into as a writer and a reader of a novel. And I think that's the other thing. So when I had only written short stories, and when I started working on my novel, the thing I had to like say to myself over and over, and actually like had to tape it over my desk at some point, was like, the unit of a novel is a chapter, not a sentence. And I had to like write that to myself over and over again, because like I'm a deeply sentence obsessed person. It's not to say that I didn't care about all the sentences in my novel and end up polishing them, but it's just like a different quality of attention to the sentence in a short story. And I think that is something that feels just like dramatically different. Like when I'm writing a novel, right? There are certain times when you're like, the sentence has to take a complete backseat to like, you have to move the plot at some point. Like whether you're doing it in a conventional way or not, you do have to like make things happen that feel, like there's momentum behind them. You don't necessarily have to have those concerns within the space of a short story.
Yeah, totally. I really agree with that, Pam. I was like looking in despair at my novel manuscript, being like, this sentence, who let me write this? Like, because when I write a short story, like write the thing I write and then like leave for the day. And when I come back, I'll always go back and fix all I'd like fix every single sentence. But with a novel, you just can't, there's too many sentences. You like can't do it. So I think that's, and I also think that like a novel becomes dead if you make it perfect. Like if you try to make, like if you did that to a novel, it feels, or at least to me, it feels like you'd be like overworking the dough too much. And with a story, it can like withstand that level of attention and fussiness in the sentence.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Yalitza, go ahead.
And I was gonna say, yeah, and that's what makes, I feel like that's what makes writing short stories harder in a way, in terms of, because you have to, like, you do have the time and to like find the perfect way to say something. With like with a novel, not that you shouldn't try to do that in a novel, but exactly what Shruti and Pam already said. But I'm a pretty organized person, but like when I'm working on my novel, it's like I spend half the time just like looking for things. Like, did I say that here? Or, you know, where did that character first come in? And, you know, like, so just the mechanics of it are just really can be time consuming. Whereas with the story, you know, you can go over it over and over and over again, but you can also kill it if you do that, because like when I start writing on a story, I always I usually like will write down sort of whatever the core is. You know, it could be like a piece of dialogue or like a weird thing I saw, and then kind of build around that. And but I'm able to sort of keep coming back to it, you know. But if I look at it for too long, then sometimes it starts getting away from me, and then it's just like, okay, like I broke it. Like I say that sometimes, like, oh no, I broke the story, and then I have to like go away and not look at it for a while so I can like rediscover it. So yeah, so that's why I think in some ways short stories are harder, but novels are harder just in the terms of just length, obviously, but just like, yeah, just finding your way around it.
Yeah, the canvas is bigger for a novel. Yeah, I mean, I'm working on I'm trying to write my first novel, and I just had my first bit of feedback, and hilariously, the person who gave me this feedback said, I think you can make it shorter. And here I was to think, oh yeah, maybe it should just be a longer short story. But yeah, I think with a short story, at least from my experience, I kind of know straight away who needs to be in the story, and I'm just kind of like moving with the flow. I'm not, you know, the thinky part of my brain doesn't get in the way too much. With the novel, I'm constantly second guessing and thinking, oh, because it's a novel, I should be doing X, Y, and Z, whereas I should really just be doing more of the divining rod kind of, you know, more of the intuitive, instinctual things that I normally tap into with a story. So yeah, it's all hard, but it's all fun, but it's all hard.
Yeah, that's the takeaway from this, is it's all
yeah. These are the ways in which it is fun and hard.
Can we talk a little bit about how you all approach writing a story? And I know for me, the answer is it's different for each story, but Yalitza got into it a bit with just thinking of that theme, right? Beginning with a theme.
Yeah, but it could be anything really. And that's the thing. We were talking about sort of how like reading short stories, it's kind of like, it's exciting because, you know, the author can do anything. And so, I mean, sometimes I'll start with, you know, just like an interesting person but as I said, I try to remember whatever the seed of the story is. I try, as I'm working on it, I try to remember that. Even if I end up taking it out of the story, because I feel like that's what's exciting about it. And that's what and also because starting a certain place, it's like okay, that's sort of what keeps me going. I want to see if I can make this work. But yeah, that's sort of what that's how I began. I'm the kind of writer that I think about. I think about the story for a long time before I actually start writing. So that's just me. But sometimes sometimes I know what I'm going to do as soon as I find that seed, and other times it's like, I don't know, it's just like some weird thing, like I don't know, the story that I started working on to so that I'm not working on my novel. When I get frustrated with my novel, I like started working on the story that I have no idea where it's going, and that's what's fun about it, because in the novel I'm so like, I think like Mimi said, I'm like, oh my god, it's like I have to do certain things. And it was just like I was visiting Milwaukee, and I kept seeing bunnies and in the city, and I was like, and I was with my husband, and I was like, do you see these bunnies? And he's like, he grew up there, so it's like, that's anyway. And I was like, I'm used to seeing rats and pigeons in the city. So I started a story, and who knows where that's going to take me. So.
For me, it's almost always an image. I have an opening image and that's it. And then sometimes I have a closing image, but often not. And that's really it. That there's like no other like conscious logic to it, which is like, again, as we've said so many times before, why I love short stories, because I can just like follow one image. And I do think, as you were sort of saying, Yalitza, it's like really important to me to stay close to that initial thing that sparked it, because otherwise there is no story without it. And I think that for me, in that short story form, that initial image often serves as sort of like a question that becomes the engine of a short story. Something I heard that was really wise from Danielle Evans, who is an incredible short story writer. She said that the difference with a novel and a short story is that in a novel, you have to keep trading questions, or you have to update your questions. You have to like go from one question to another, which I think is really, really true, because like a short story can start on that one image, that one question, but a novel, that can't sustain the whole thing. And I think that's partly why it's so messy and convoluted and sort of like hard to hold in the head.
I'm very much the same as Pam. An image gets stuck in my head and I just can't, I don't think, oh, what an arresting image, I'm going to save it for a story. It's like, I can't get this friggin' image out of my head. So clearly it's doing something. It's kind of like caught onto my, brain, or a gesture or something, or even just like a smell. And usually it's like that, but with one of the stories, it was literally like ripped from the headlines, which is the longer story in the collection, The Woman in the Closet, and that was inspired by a real life article about an elderly woman in Japan who was discovered to be living in a young man's closet, unknown to him. And she was homeless. She was living secretly in his closet and eating his food, and I became obsessed with the story and tried to find out more about it. Couldn't, and I just kept sitting with this image or this situation with this person in my head, and tons of questions. Who is she? What led her to the situation? How did she become homeless? Who did she love? Who did she care about? And how did she feel about the man whose home she'd broken into? And that became, and also I kind of felt like I think there were maybe like 2 or 3 paragraphs about that situation that just got recycled, and I just felt like the woman at the center of this story, this experience, just didn't get her due. And so there was a sense of kind of wanting to kind of pay tribute to this person. So I ended up creating a fictionalized Chineseified version of her story, but it was also something that I just kept returning to and just couldn't. I think it's really good to to just let the things that keep sticking in your mind stick in your mind because it's telling you something, it's sort of connecting with something deeper, right? And sometimes you don't know what that is until you start writing.
I somewhat just don't have an answer to the question because it feels like a really long time since I wrote a story, and it's sort of like not that writing a story or feeling like writing a story is being in pain, but like, you know how after you're in pain and then you forget, you're like, that really hurt, but you just don't remember what it feels like anymore. And that's how it feels like right now, but maybe the opposite, where I really miss that first, that like, oh, you know, that first spark of having an idea for something and then letting it race ahead of you. I don't really remember. It's been a really long time. I don't even know. I don't know how to write short stories anymore. I feel very bewildered by the form. So I don't have an answer. I hope I figure it out at some point.
Shruti, that's true of every story, though. It feels like, you know, the part that's magic about it is, you know, you can only kind of hope for that. I think I'm always hoping for that, but usually sitting down at the computer and not really getting that. What Yalitza said earlier about taking breaks from the novel to work on short stories really resonated because they're so appealing when you're just stuck in the middle of this like long slog that you don't know the end of, and you think, oh, maybe a short story will be a nice, you know, respite. I can just knock this out, and then it's its own set of issues. And I have found personally for me, like, if there's no magical element where I just feel that I'm being channeled through, the short story will usually feel dead as well. And so I agree with Shruti. It's very elusive and hard to capture and even talk about.
One thing I want to add is like what sometimes can kill a short story before it started is to use an idea to as its engine, because you're already being very cerebral about it. You're already kind of almost like writing. You're trying to like prove your hypotheses, and as opposed to exploring and experimenting. So, but I think starting from an idea as opposed to a question is different, and I would warn people away from getting too attached to ideas.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think for me, a lot of stories start from feelings or memories, and I wanted to get into and give everyone a chance to just talk about the genesis of a single story, or, you know, as much as you can kind of remember about it at the moment. But where did it start? Did it start with an image, or a person that you saw on the street, if you can remember that, and then how the process of writing it went? And for me, I could just start and say that I have a recent story that was out in The Cut called Slow and Steady, and it's just about a woman who runs into a guy she went to college with, and not a lot happens. They do the crossword together, but in that story, there are a lot of emotions that she cycles through related to how she felt in college period, and then especially around this other person, and how he was able to elicit all these feelings in her after she had become an adult and become a successful writer. And it really started, I don't know who's here, but, you know, it started actually on a trip that I took to New York, and I saw an old friend of mine who I had known in college, and I just remembered that feeling of like inadequacy, you know, in seminars and things, and just feeling like an imposter for being there, and especially an imposter as like a writer who was not, who didn't grow up with parents who like read books or, you know, took them to museums and stuff, just feeling that kind of inferiority, I think. just seeing him like brought all these emotions back, and I was like, oh, okay, this is a story. And I just wrote it, I think, in a day, because it was all, I just like thought about it during that trip, came home, and then wrote it all out, because I don't think it was just seeing him. It was probably like all those years of being in school and being around types of people like that, and just never really writing about it or thinking about it until that moment.
Yeah, I have a story that's in my collection called The Laughter Artist. And that story I actually just realized last night. So the way that the story came about is that I invented this profession that's like a laughter artist, that you can like, you go to school for it and you train. It's like a specific kind of voice acting. And then you can like laugh in commercials. People hire you to do like very specialized voiceover work. But you also are like an artist, and you have your own special laughs that are your artistic laughs. And I actually got that idea because I was listening to This American Life a really long time ago. And they were talking about, so Fran Drescher on the set of The Nanny was being stalked, and the audiences were like, it's filmed in front of a studio audience. And the audiences were just, you could just come in and anybody could do it. So they decided to close the studio for her, and then cast the audience, or just like screen the audience. And they started to realize that there were some people who had just had these really wonderful, infectious laughs that like elicited better performances, and also like overall better laughter from the studio. So that these people all became like regular laughers, and other sitcoms started doing it too. So that was the germ of the story. And my story is about a laughter artist who is in the immediate aftermath of a sexual assault. And those two halves, like that's just an idea, the idea of a laughter artist. That's not a story. That's just a situation. So something else had to like rub up against it, uncomfortably rub up against it. And so I had one thing hanging around in my mind, and then I had that other half for another story, and then understood that I need to put them together. And then that created a really interesting tension for me that I was exploring. And I just realized last night, I was like, oh, but of course I put those together, because the very reason that laughter artists in the real world were created was because of a sexual violation. It was because Fran Drescher was being stalked. So I think that there's some things that your brain makes intuitive connections. And that's a wonderful thing about once you have an idea, or once you step into the space of the story, there's so many ways where your brain is just making these patterns and connections, and you can just follow it and listen to it.
So maybe 2 years ago, I read this really wonderful Nicole Krauss short story called Seeing Our Shoddy in the New Yorker. And I honestly don't remember the details of it, but there's one turn in the story where there's like a description of film. So there's like an ekphrasis moment, a description of a film that feels like a little bit spooky or supernatural. And I just love that. And like the weirdness of that one tiny nugget of the story really stuck with me. And I was like, I want to write a story that in maybe no other way bears any relationship, but has something to do with ekphrasis and film. And so I have this short story also in the cut called See It Slant. That is about 2 film students living in New York. And I think that happens to me on occasion with short stories in a way that it just can't with the novel. Lauren Groff said in this interview that, like wanting, I think she said something, I'm paraphrasing poorly, but something about wanting to like write somebody else's novel is like lusting after somebody's soul. Like it's not good, it's not healthy, you can't have it, don't do it. I completely agree with a novel, but with a short story, I think there are moments when I can just sort of like be sparked by someone else's soul and by the like feeling and just like some kind of move that they made in that story, because like, again, you're not committing your whole life to it. You're not committing your whole identity to it. And so there may be 2 or 3 stories of mine, including that one in the cut, where they were sparked by another story.
I can talk about, I have a story called The Letizian Age, and it's about a woman who wants to be a geologist. And the story started out as actually an essay. It was I had an assignment. I did my undergrad at Mills College, and I had the amazing, amazing luck, or I don't know what I want to call it, of having Yi-Yoon Lee as my professor. And it was a creative nonfiction workshop, and the assignment was like to use a thing in a story, in an essay. And I thought, oh, I want to write about how I didn't become a geologist. I'm going to use a rock. That was really just too on the nose. It just didn't work. And then as I was kind of like trying to figure out how to write the essay, I was reading some of my geology books, and there was a list in one of the books of famous geologists. And so I thought, oh, I'll use this list. Because I looked through the list, and the list of the famous geologists were all white and male. And I just thought, well, I'll use the list because I'm not white and male, and just and use it kind of like a marker, and use different geological concepts to go into all the different ways I failed as a geologist. And the essay was called An Alphabetical List of Famous Geologists and the Failed Geologists Who Loved Them. The essay was terrible, but then I kept thinking about this list, and I thought about my life, and I thought, well, maybe I'll make a story out of this, because part of what attracted me to the list is that it just touched on my own life, and so I wanted to write a character that was like me, but not me. And I fictionalized a bunch of stuff, and because it was like, I just felt like this list kind of showed a lot of the reasons why I didn't become a geologist, or some of the reasons, some in terms of some racism and sexism. And so I built the story around that. And yeah, and then because I fictionalized it, I was able to add sort of way more exciting things that happened in my own life. Yeah.
I've already talked about the woman in the closet, so I'm going to yield my time.
Arguably a perfect story.
Oh.
I think many of our opinions. I wanted to talk actually a little bit to Shruti and Mimi specifically, but anyone can answer this question. I think it's broader than this, but I wanted to
how we made our millions through our short story collection.
So Shruti and Mimi both have debuted with story collections. Despite, I think, a lot of popular advice from just the people who will tell you things about publishing, that story collections, that you should wait for your story collection and put out a novel first. So I'm kind of wondering, did you hear those kinds of comments? Why did you release the story collection first? And also, why do you think people say this? And I guess, yeah, anyone can answer, but I'm curious.
I didn't have anything else except for a short story collection. So when I was knocking on agents' doors or sending directly to, actually, I didn't want to even find an agent. I just wanted to go straight to editors that I knew. But the advice that I got was, no, find an agent for your work. So I did. And so I went knocking on agents' doors, and all of them said some variation of, oh, we like it, but do you have a novel? Or we like it, but we don't think we can sell it on its own. And so then I understood the commercial reality that befalls short story debuts. And so I basically found the publisher on my own, and they did a really great job with the editing, but also with outreach. And I hired a freelance publicist, a friend of mine who does works as a freelance publicist, Alison Sinclair, who, just to make sure that it we did everything we possibly could for that little book, and then it was on the back, and then the book got reviewed, and it won some prizes, and then through with that I kind of felt like I had the confidence to, and by that time I'd started working on a novel, and I had 40 pages that I didn't hate, and I just started I sent them to a couple of agents that were introduced to me, and that's kind of how it is. No one dissuaded me from trying to publish a short story collection, but if I'd had a novel, they probably would have said, I don't know. I mean, I think Shruti, you can speak to this more, but I think I went about it in a really odd way, because I'm sure that if I hadn't put out the short story collection and it hadn't got some very nice, thoughtful notices, that I wouldn't have been able to get a meeting with agents with my novel pages, because I was a lesser unknown quantity. And they should teach this. They should teach this stuff on writing courses. I don't know whether they do anymore, but in my day, there wasn't any of this. I think it's really helpful for folks to get a little bit more of the unglamorous and emotionally wearying process of trying to get your book in front of people, or your writing in front of people.
Yeah, I think I had a somewhat similar experience to you, Mimi, in that I only had a short story collection. A short story collection is wonderful. Short story collections are great. I don't know why they're not like seen as commercially viable. Although I do agree that people should be compensated for their work, and money and sales are like meaningful metrics or a meaningful way to support work, obviously. But I think that there's a certain freedom that comes with debuting with the short story collection, where everybody's like, oh, it's just a short story collection. Like, don't worry about it. Your novel will come out later and it'll be fun. Like there's just not a lot of pressure. And I think that there's also this weird idea that like stories are just like automatically literary in a way that novels aren't necessarily. And maybe that's why they are not as commercially whatever as novels are seen as. But actually, I think that can be kind of nice. It's just like, okay, it's just a short story collection. Don't worry about it. So I also was in touch with agents over the years because I was publishing stories in magazines, but everybody wanted a novel except for a couple of agents. And then God bless, one of them was really, really got my work and was willing to go to bat for just a short story collection. But at that point, when we signed, I was working on a novel. So she was like, I think it would be better if we just waited. And so we sold them both. And then my publisher decided to put out the stories first. And I don't totally know why. I think maybe just because they were more done. And here we are.
Why do we think stories are, I don't know, a harder sell, at least in the publishing world? Like, why do you think that is, even though they're short and in theory?
I wonder if it's because of the intensity that we talked about earlier on, where it's like asking people to watch, rather than sort of saying, okay, I'm going to watch this box set of The Sopranos, whatever, I'm going to spend in the space of one book, just completely kind of commit to 10 or 12 or 15 different worlds and characters. And I don't know, I mean, I know that people are selling publishing stories as singles these days, so there's sort of more kind of solo pieces in different formats, so there's more digestible and accessible. But I think it's more of a perception thing than anything inherent to the quality of a short story, honestly. I think it's marketing. I think to what Shruti you just said, that maybe people just think of short stories as harder, like literary, therefore harder, which is not necessarily the case. There are some really fun, zippy short stories out there, beach reads even. I don't know, what's everyone else like?
I think that I think for the people tasked with selling the, a collection versus a novel, I'm guessing that it's just easier with a novel because you can sell like one thing. You can describe this one world. And with stories, I think, it's like, I don't, maybe describing it in a more succinct way is harder. That's my guess. But in terms of, but also I feel like, people are resistant to, not us people, but people are resistant to reading collections sometimes, because I feel like, with a collection of stories, because you don't know what you're gonna get. Like, you have many different beginnings, many different middles, many different endings, and that puts some people off. I find that exciting, but those that don't find that exciting are put off by that. So,
Is it like buying an assorted chocolate box, and there's always going to be like the orange, like orange brandy that nobody wants?
I never eat those. Yeah.
But
exactly.
I actually do find short stories harder. I think maybe it's just me, but I do feel like it requires something. Maybe you guys already kind of said this, instead of just being like, okay, I know what I'm reading, I'm just going to go to the next part of the same long project. It's actually sort of similar to writing a novel, where you're just like, for better or for worse, you're like, here I am. You're never like, what am I going to write today? Or like, I'm going to just write the same thing I've been writing for actually years, so I don't have to worry about the like, kind of like, oh, what's going to happen next sort of. You're in the rhythm of a longer story, and you can just be wrapped into the story collection has such a different rhythm that sometimes it's like each story has its own momentum, its own pacing. And of course, a good story collection has a very strong voice, and like probably diction, and like sentence level is cohesive. But I do feel like it is harder to like keep stopping and starting. It's just a different rhythm. So because I love short stories, I think that that's part of the pleasure of reading a collection. That's exactly what you're saying, Yalitza. Just stopping and starting. It's like almost like on a movie set. You know how they will like film a little bit, and then you like stop, and then you have to like reset everything, and then you move the camera to another angle. That there's something really delicious about just getting these different perspectives, but I think for me it requires more work to read like that.
My cranky auntie response to this is that it's just all about what people are familiarized to. I think that if everyone grew up reading like one short story collection every year in class from from third grade on, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, honestly. I'm like, this is probably a terrible metaphor, because I am not a music scholar, but I'm like, I'm sure there are also people who complain about the days when we moved from listening to music in like hour-long symphonies to like 4-minute songs, right? Like, I think it's really all what people are looking for and what they're used to. Because I do agree with you on one hand, Shruti, that's a very different experience. But then that just means like, oh, today I want like a pear instead of an apple. It's not like pears are all bad and apples are inherently good, right? So I think it's really about like, it's all of our jobs to go out there and be short story evangelists and just make sure that people read them, because I can't think of a single person I know who's like been introduced in a real way to short stories and then is like, I don't like them, they're worse than novels.
Yeah, and it's so cool to get to see a writer working through all these different ideas and prompts and feelings in the span of one book, and to really like see these moments of their life captured, I think, in a way that the novel is like a little bit false to me, like you're trying to distill a bunch of years into this one static object. And I think for myself, at least, like with short stories, I'm so much more forgiving of myself looking back. It's like a tattoo or something, right? It's like, this was a period of my life, I wrote this story, and it's good for what it is. I can probably do better now, but that was who I was then. And I think with a novel, there's more of this constant revising and updating to the most recent person you are, and then it's all like trapped in amber, and you kind of can't go back and fix anything even if you want to. Yeah. There is a great question actually in our Q&A that I think is somewhat related to this question of accessibility or maybe marketing with short stories, but Jane asks, if a novel creates a contract with a reader, does that make some short story writing more of a selfish endeavor in the way it opens easier to experimentation? So yeah, I wonder if that is somehow related to the difficulty question that we've been talking about. Like, are stories more difficult because the author themselves are wanting to challenge themselves?
Difficult or exciting? I think it's different sides of the same coin. I don't think they're more selfish, because you're still, you're still, even if you're approaching a short story that way, you're still writing it with the ultimate destination is to end up in a reader's hands, right? You're not completely oblivious to or unconcerned with the reader's experience. Yeah, it's not like a big jerk off exercise or anything like that. Like, oh wow, that was a great sentence that I wrote. It's really always with the reader in mind. But maybe it's less of a conscious constraint in the creation of it, and it comes more in the revising and editing parts, perhaps. What does everyone else think? I'd love for someone to say, yeah, I just write just for me, nobody else.
I do.
I
do.
Well, I do at first, but then eventually I think about the reader. So
yeah, I mean, you can't start writing it thinking about the reader. Like I'll think about the reader eventually, but up until the end, I am writing it for me, I think. Yeah.
I'm writing it for
Remember,
me.
we're trying to do good PR for short stories, because otherwise people are going to leave this event and say, don't read short stories. All short story writers are selfish. They just don't think about themselves.
But there's, and I'm not sure if this is part of answering the question. There's also how one reads like a story or in a journal or in a collection. It's like when I read a novel, like I need to like sort of read the whole novel. I mean, not to say that I, read it. Sometimes it takes me longer. Sometimes there's a break, but like I don't always read a collection like from start to finish. Sometimes I'll read other things. Sometimes I'll read 2 stories and then read something else. And so there's just, but I feel like a lot of like someone at a bookstore, like who's not used to short stories, maybe like trying to read a short story collection as you would read a novel is can be, it's not really the same thing. I mean, I know some people that do read a whole collection, and I have read whole collections, but I don't always do that. And so it's just like a different expectation, I feel like, than reading a whole novel.
Maybe it is more selfish, but I don't think selfish is necessarily a bad thing. When it comes to art, I do think that like what I'm looking for always when I read, whether it be a novel or a short story, is a poem, is like, and this is just very personal, right? For me personally, I'm looking for something that's very singular. I want something that feels very, very of itself. And that means that, in order to get to that, I may find things that I don't personally connect with, but then someone else will connect with it, and that's fine. But I think that, ultimately, I guess it's just like gets to the question of like, what is the goal of writing in general? Like, what does it mean to be selfish as a writer? Because I don't think that any great art is produced by trying to please everyone. And so I feel like maybe there are more risks that you may displease more person in a short story form, but also like aim for the stars, right? And you may end up with something like really spectacular.
Yeah, I'm interested in what the author is obsessed with. And that is very selfish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, selfishness, I think, is often obsession, and that's a great thing in a story.
But I think ultimately, I mean, and I agree totally with that, but we are still trying to create an experience for somebody else to participate in, right? So in that sense, we're not just completely, you know, disregarding the reader.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, why do we even publish? You know, why do we get our work out there? We want it to be interacted with and encountered by people other than ourselves.
Yeah, but I think, you know, related to Pam's point, I'm often thinking like, can this reach just one other weirdo? You know, it's not really an editing for a,
yeah,
might edit a novel, I guess, you know.
Yeah.
Or more particular.
Related
to all of this, we have a couple questions that are about, actually Rachel Markowitz has a question about writing community and if you all have a group or trusted readers. And someone also asked about just like revision and how you choose to incorporate revision or not. So maybe we just like end with that as a last question. Share a little bit about readers you may have, people you may share your work with, and if you listen to them.
I definitely, I think it's important to have a writing community or at least one reader. I do feel very strongly about not showing. For me personally, I like to see, I want to exhaust my obsession. I don't like to show things to anyone too early because I do take trusted readers' feedback, but once I know that I've like made it, you know, as weird as I want to make it on my own, and then I'll read feedback or I'll take the feedback, and I'll just sort of take it in, but I won't really do anything about it right away, because I feel like that kind of sifts out kind of what I think is important from the feedback. I think to give it sort of some time to simmer.
Yeah, time is a really important element for revision for me, in that you know, I worked on this collection for like over 10 years, and some of those stories were really old by the time that I was revising it for publication. And it was actually like the longest that I had ever tried to go, like to leave something alone and then come back and look at it. And it was incredible. That was so potent, because all of the ego, you know, it's like when I have like a first draft of something, sometimes when I get criticism, I'll just be like, oh, this person just doesn't get my like incredible artistic genius vision, and like they just don't get it. Like obviously it's working. And at the point where, you know, you're like a couple years away from it, you're kind of like, I just want it to be the best it can be. And this does seem a little gimmicky, actually. So time, I mean, obviously trusted readers are extremely important and very lucky to have some in my life. But I also think that ultimately the greatest editor and the person who's able to see the flaws clearest is future you. And sometimes I think that we like always, sometimes there's this way where we're like always like in a rush to like finish the project and like published it and like have a book out. And I don't know if I would have necessarily chosen this for myself. This book took a really long time to publish, and I don't know if I would have necessarily chosen that particular length of time. It was very long to get it into print, but there is there is some grace to having a lot of time to be away from it and then to come back with the skills that you have and just the distance you have and revise from there.
I think I agree with everything that Yalitza and Shruti just said, and I'll just add that when you're sharing your work, make sure that you show it to the person who you feel really gets you and your weirdness, and will tell you things that you probably don't want to hear, but that's the what person you should listen to. And I know who those people are in my community, and I've been guilty of showing something to someone who I know is going to be a little bit more just overall supportive, but might not necessarily give me the the really pinpoint sharp feedback that a story or a piece of work needs, because they can say stuff like, I think you need to just unleash more of your weirdness here and here, and you're holding yourself back, or what, so yeah, share it with the person who gets you and who is probably going to tell you something that may lead you to not speak with them for a few weeks, but ultimately you'll be grateful for it.
I just co-signed the future you thing that Shruti said, and I will also say, just like never, ever, ever show your short stories or any of your work to a whole workshop. Like honestly, just don't do it. That is the worst way to get feedback. You'll be so discombobulated. Future you is the best editor, and then also if you have like even one person is enough. Like I feel like there's often this like anxiety that like oh I have to have like a writing community and like a writing group and we have to meet like every week, and that's lovely. But you don't need that, because I feel like I often see beginning writers are like waiting to have that before they like give themselves permission. And just don't wait for that. You need one reader, and maybe that reader is just future you.
All right. So I have this syllabus that I've mentioned that all of these kind, brilliant people have contributed to, and I have no way of chatting it to everybody. So I'm told that it will be sent out. The link will be sent out to all the folks who RSVP to this event. And here's Graham to wrap it all up.
Yes, very true. Yeah, so we are going to take the syllabus and we're going to email it to everybody who signed up tonight. So if you're attending, you're going to get the syllabus, and look for it sometime tomorrow. Thank you all so much for this. It was great to hear your thoughts as writers and readers, and I've been a fan of you guys for a long time, and I'm really excited for all like the new stuff as well, the novels to be and everything. So to our audience tonight, thank you for coming. You're going to see that survey after we close out, and please check out some more of our festival events. We are going all the way to the 24th. So go to litquake.org and check out more events. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks for having us.
It was great to
Thank you everyone for watching
on Zoom.
Thanks everyone.
Good night.
Bye.